Hey everybody, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont State Senate, here with my daily update on Vermont's response to the COVID pandemic. And today we'll take a bit of a detour from discussion of public health measures and the policies the state's trying to implement to get our economy back on track and continue to be vigilant about public health, and talk about something which, unless you've been under a rock in the last couple weeks, you'll know that the discussions of racial discrimination, equity, those conversations have exploded onto the fore, not just in large cities around the country where we see on the nightly news, but also here in Vermont. And I'm really pleased that Jabulani Gamache is here to speak with me today. Jabu has been a Burlington City Police Commissioner, which is the civilian group that oversees the Burlington Police Department, and has recently been elected to be the chair of that board. So Jabu, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So Jabu, I know that in the last couple years, there's been a lot of discussion in the city of Burlington about the need to more directly confront issues of racial equity when it comes to the criminal justice system and law enforcement. And can you just talk a little bit about one of the reasons why you wanted to be on the Burlington Police Commission in the first place? I can say, having been a city councilor, it's very rare that younger people want to serve on city commissions. Maybe just tell us a little bit about why you wanted to become a Burlington Police Commissioner in the first place.
It really happened when the videos of the Melly Brothers incident came out. I didn't know Jeremy all that well prior to which, but his brother Albion has been a good friend and a teammate of mine on my soccer team for many years now. And so when that video came out, it just like,
yeah, obviously it's an emotional thing to recall, but for those who are less familiar with them by name, can you just give a quick summary of the incident?
Well, you see in the video, Jeremy is having a heated discussion with another gentleman. Looks like an employee from a bar, and then the officer walks up. Jeremy's unaware that he's even there, and the officer made no mention to announce himself and shoved him very hard into the wall. He went to the wall head first, was knocked out cold, and even started puking shortly thereafter due to that head injury.
Yeah, and he is a person of color, so that's an important factor in this.
Absolutely.
So once you got on the police commission, obviously the police commission deals with many issues related to overseeing the police department, ranging probably from federal grants to the actual personnel issues and things. What's your experience been like so far as a police commissioner, as you knowing that one of the reasons you were motivated to get involved was to bring greater oversight, transparency, accountability to the department?
Well, I guess what I noticed first off the bat was that we don't really have all that much, I guess, power oversight per se. It's like we're able to review the process of discipline being handed out, but other than really either agreeing or disagreeing, that's pretty much all the oversight power we have on that. We are able to like craft shape policy and directives at the department, which is a big help. But in terms of like actual accountability and oversight and things like that, we don't have the tools necessary to do those things.
How have you found, just in this first, you've been a commissioner for about a little more than a year now? Is that right?
It'll be a year exactly in July.
Okay, so coming up on a year, what are some of the policy areas that once you started to get more familiar with the department, you realized probably needed review or further discussion or more broad community input as you thought about them? Because I know, having had an activist background, you go into certain positions because you're passionate about something and want to bring new insights. Once you get there, you start, understanding kind of the lay of the land a little differently. Where have you been finding that, there does need to be more systemic review, more revisiting of existing policies? Anything stand out?
I will say when I earlier on when I first joined this, I did think that, like retraining and, like updating use of force policy, and those were, I guess, not the be all end all, but like those were like the strongest ways that we could move forward and make, I guess, make this more accountable. But I've had a pretty profound shift in about last month last month and a half, especially over the last 2 weeks. And I don't like, sorry, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. It's a very, very small piece are those things. To really make a difference, it's going to be a lot more than just policy and drafting directives, because those are a bit more reactionary. Those are in place for when someone does mess up. But how do we get to the point where they don't make these mistakes in the first place? And that's what I've noticed. Is like that's what we need to really focus on.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've come to some of the same shifts in thinking myself in recent weeks, because I have had my hand in writing lots of legislation which was intended to help correct behaviors. And just as you say, it's often in response to when something goes wrong. Then everyone says, how could that have happened? Let's add a new training module, or let's require new data collection. And while it's not bad to do those things, it doesn't address the sort of foundational issues that are involved. As you've seen the protests the last couple of weeks, one of the things I feel is, whenever we have national protests like this, there's a tendency, especially in the national media, and I'm not, dissing them, but to say, this time it's different. The conversation is different this time. There's more momentum to actually take this seriously and take action. When you see what's going on in the wake of the George Floyd murder and all the protests, from your vantage point, you care deeply about these issues. Do you see anything different this time than whether it was Eric Garner or any of the other tragedies we've seen around the country?
This time it does feel different. I mean, myself, and I'd say most Black people have always been mad, have been very, very mad. But this is the first time where I've finally seen a fair amount of white people in my life, almost, if not equally as mad. And yeah, so I do feel that this feels much different than time before. And I feel the onus is really now to really, I guess, lack of a better, strike while the iron's hot and use this momentum to see if we can actually make some significant strides and changes.
So the primary shift, you think, is that there's broader outrage, if you will, or broader commitment from people outside the people personally. I don't know, by getting white people to be enlisted in the cause and feeling the same sense of urgency. That's the sort of significant difference this time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can have every Black person in America, like upset and screaming, why is this still happening? Why is this still happening? Which we have been, but it's not until we have everybody else and, the white majority on our side and fully backing us on this.
Yeah. So tell me, you've come to know through work and now through your commissioner role, a number of police officers. I have many law enforcement officials in my personal history in terms of family and friends. How do you, when you reflect on the fact that there are these instances of criminal behavior, in some instances, unethical behavior, discriminatory behavior, and then you also know there are police officers who do a good job. Can you just talk a little bit about that tension there on a human level, knowing that it's a systemic problem, and that systemic problem isn't necessarily an indictment of every single person who is in the law enforcement profession? How do you think about that yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that is a hard question. Yeah, it's Sorry, I'm trying
No,
to.
no, I mean, these are the big questions, right? Because I feel like one of our primary, one of the most important things about successfully moving forward and helping upend the worst elements of our system is we need to support the best elements
Mm-hmm.
of, our system as it is, and then try to make the whole system look like that, rather than um, cast one net to imply that if you're a law enforcement officer, you are part of the problem necessarily. And I feel like then we see people get defensive very quickly, and it starts to peel off, and you start
Mm-hmm.
to create camps of people, when really what, if you're right in that there is a growing sense, even by the white majority, that it's time to band together and come up with a unified approach, that has to have a positive vision. In some ways, there's that tension, right now, when we see images of, protests and cops with shields and people getting hit with batons, and seeing elderly people getting pushed down on the sidewalk and all that. And yet many of the same law enforcement officials are the ones who we're going to be looking to operate in more humane, appropriate, and bias-free ways moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, from my time bartending downtown, I've seen hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of interactions between law enforcement and community members downtown, and most are fine without incident, and everyone goes about their day. But it's instances that don't. It's the times where the public trust is violated, and it's gone to the point where I feel that most people don't dislike or hate all cops, but the frustration is so palpable and so real that's like it's hard to not lump, I guess, everyone together when it's an institution. Just because there's a lot of good apples, it's an institution, and like if you're part of the institution, it's hard to not get lumped in with it all.
For sure. No, I think that's well put. And it's always one of the challenges as a white person to appreciate what it's like to not know who the good apples are and who the bad apples are, and who may subject you to treatment that is discriminatory at any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you look ahead, one of the things I've been thinking about in a slightly different context, but in terms of correctional officers, people who work inside our prisons,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I've started to really appreciate more is that we need to start thinking about correctional officers in a different way, and not have it be a job where the person's primary daily routine is being like a guard and, enforcing sort of coercive situations for those inside our correctional facilities, but rather be thinking about being part of the rehabilitative process. And I wonder, do you think that you mentioned how training is only a small piece of what's really a much more deep-rooted and systemic problem? Should we be changing the way we think about the profession of law enforcement entirely? I mean, it's a big question, but is there something about the nature of being a law enforcement officer which we should, as a society, be sort of infusing with a different elements?
I think so. I think we should absolutely need to reexamine what exactly we need and what we want from our police. It's like, if you call 911 and you have an emergency, they'll ask you, sorry, you have an emergency, and you're like, yeah, there's a fire, and send the fire department over, or like, hey, I broke my leg, send an EMT. But I don't know, it's really the best use of our resources if someone calls and says, hey, there's someone on Church Street, looking like they're in crisis and they need help, is an armed officer really the best use of our resources for that? And it's not to say that officer's not been, very well trained in de-escalation and whatnot, but is that the best way? I mean, I feel like there's so much on law enforcement's plate to deal with, and we've been just adding more things for them to deal with and for them to fix, and we haven't equipped them with the tools, and nor should that really be their job to, I guess, kind of fix some of these societal problems that we've kind of dumped on them. So yeah, we should.
Well, I hope
We need.
one of the things I hope
Sorry.
the state can do, working with not just the Burlington Police Department, but other communities that have their own police departments, is there are some counties, very large counties around the country, counties that are so big they probably have populations almost the same as Vermont's entire population, where they are treating 911 calls differently. So if someone calls 911 and it's a mental health call, there is a diversion of the call to a designated mental health team who go out and address the particular situation, rather than sending a police officer who oftentimes may have been trained in how to respond to mental health and de-escalation, but ultimately that's not that person's area of expertise, and then puts everybody in a very fraught situation. So that may be an opportunity moving ahead to help more appropriately respond to those instances, and not layer, as you put it, on top of a police officer the requirement that they be sort of expert in all of society's ills, which is probably not very reasonable. Well, we have a couple seconds left. Let me ask, we're right now, the passion, the anger, the call for action is echoing throughout the state. I suspect that protests and vigils and other actions will continue effectively indefinitely. What are some of the broad themes that you hope Vermont will confront in the coming months? Not necessarily a specific bill, but what are some of the things you think Vermont should be doing in the next couple months and trying to discuss and confront that would help us start to reshape and reform the way we handle law enforcement?
I think by all of us, like we're doing right here, having these conversations and trying to come up with, plausible ways forward. Because I find a lot of the times, a lot of the ideas people have are great ideas, but the debate's not often framed in a way that people will understand. We have to like frame these ideas that we have in ways that are, make sense and are doable. And I think that's absolutely possible. I think it's absolutely possible and achievable that we can do that.
Well, I hope you're right. I know that one of the great challenges, especially as a policymaker, is you pass a bill or a law and it becomes a law and you think, oh, we've addressed that issue. And it only addresses it when you have broad public understanding of the why you did it, the what it is, and a sense that if it doesn't happen the way it's intended to, there's some sort of consequence as a result. And I do think that in a state that has a relatively small non-white population, it's even more critical that the education piece be really there, because I think of it kind of like fighting climate change. There are many people who it's not front of mind to be an environmentalist because they're too busy trying to put food on the table and they're struggling economically and with lots of other things. And I've always been a bit of an outlier by telling my environmentalist friends that we need to be coming up with strategies that enlist the broad public, even those who don't think of themselves as being primarily concerned with climate change. Otherwise, we'll never succeed. And when it comes to confronting these issues of systemic bias and discrimination in a state with a relatively small population that's not of non-white individuals, we need a broad buy-in, even of those who don't primarily think about issues of equity and equality, and they maybe too easily say, oh, that's a problem in big cities, but not here in Vermont. We need those people to be asking the same kind of questions and confronting these topics in order to broaden the cultural shift that has to occur, which won't be easy, but it's, I guess, the job of people like you and people like me to do everything we can to make it happen.
Absolutely.
So Jabu, thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you the best as the chair of the Police Commission. It is absolutely vital that we have people as thoughtful as you in these roles moving forward. So I know it's not going to be an easy time trying to shepherd through reforms and balance all of the competing challenges of what is, I believe, the state's second largest law enforcement agency. So I think it's in good hands with you and your other commissioners, and I wish you the best. And thanks again for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Thank you. All right, and I'll see the rest of you next week, and I hope you continue to do everything you can to stay safe. See ya.